In the year 476 AD, a barbarian warlord walked into a palace in northern Italy and told a teenager to pack his things. The boy was an emperor. His name was Romulus, which is almost too perfect, because the man who founded Rome over 1,000 years earlier was also named Romulus, so the whole empire opens and closes on the exact same name. History, apparently, has a sense of humor. That kid, Romulus Augustulus, the little Augustus, was the last emperor the Western Roman Empire would ever have. And here's the part nobody tells you. There was no final battle, no burning skyline, no heroic last stand on the walls. Just a boy, a quiet retirement, and the biggest door in history clicking softly shut. Rome didn't fall in a day. It spent 500 years clawing its way to the top of the world, and then spent another 500 slowly, cluelessly falling off it. This is the story of how you build the greatest empire humanity has ever seen and lose it so gradually that by the time you notice, the barbarian is already sitting on your throne. Let's rewind, because greatest empire in history was not the vibe at the beginning. Rome starts as a swamp, literally a cluster of mud huts on 7 hills next to a river, founded, supposedly, in 753 BC. The origin myth is unhinged, even by ancient standards. 2 abandoned twins, Romulus and Remus, are raised by a wolf. They grow up, decide to build a city, and immediately have a disagreement about where. Romulus solves the disagreement by killing his brother. Great start, guys. Nothing says eternal city, like fratricide before the foundation's dry. For its first couple of centuries, Rome is ruled by kings, 7 of them, allegedly. Then, around 509 BC, the Romans get so sick of one tyrannical king that they don't just overthrow him. They ban the entire concept of kings, forever. From now on, no single man rules Rome. They invent a republic, power split between elected officials and a senate, and they build the whole thing around one obsessive fear, that someone might try to become a king again. Hold on to that. It matters enormously later. Rome's founding trauma is one-man rule. Remember that when a bald general with a comb-over shows up, for now, this scrappy little republic starts doing the one thing it's genuinely brilliant at, winning wars, and, more importantly, absorbing the losers. Beat a rival city? Don't destroy it. Make it Roman. Offer it a path to citizenship. It's less an empire, and more the world's most aggressive networking event. By 264 BC, Rome runs all of Italy, which puts it on a collision course with the actual superpower of the Western Mediterranean, Carthage. A trading empire in North Africa with a navy Rome can't match, and, eventually, a general Rome will have nightmares about for generations. Hannibal. Hannibal does the single most audacious thing in ancient military history. He marches an army, with war elephants, over the Alps in winter, and drops into Italy from the north, the one direction Rome never bothered defending. For 15 years he stomps around Italy, handing Rome the worst defeats it has ever suffered. At Cannae, he surrounds and annihilates a Roman army possibly 50,000 strong in a single afternoon. Militaries still teach that battle today, and Rome just doesn't quit. It raises new armies. It loses those too, raises more. This is Rome's terrifying superpower. Not that it always won, but that it absolutely refused to accept losing. Eventually, a Roman general named Scipio ignores Hannibal entirely and attacks Carthage itself, forcing Hannibal home, and beats him. Rome doesn't just win. Decades later, it comes back, burns Carthage to the ground, and, according to legend, salts the earth so nothing grows again. Subtle. With Carthage gone, there is no one left in the Mediterranean who can stand up to Rome. The networking event has become a wrecking ball. But here's the twist that starts the whole tragedy. Conquering the world broke the republic that did it. All that conquest floods Rome with 2 things: unimaginable wealth and enslaved people, hundreds of thousands of them. Rich Romans buy up enormous farms worked by the enslaved. Ordinary citizen farmers, the backbone of the republic, come home from the wars to find they can't compete. They lose their land and drift into the city, poor and furious. So now you've got a tiny, mega-rich elite, a giant angry underclass, and a political system designed for a small city-state trying to run a continent. The Republic starts tearing itself apart. Reformers who try to help the poor get murdered in the streets. Politics stops being debate and becomes violence. And into that chaos steps exactly the kind of man the Republic was built to prevent. Ambitious generals figure out that soldiers are now more loyal to them, the guy paying them and handing out conquered land, than to Rome itself. Whoever commands the army commands everything. One man plays this game better than anyone, Julius Caesar. Brilliant, charming, wildly in debt, and hungrier than all of them. He conquers Gaul, modern France, in a campaign that kills or enslaves millions and makes himself the most popular, most dangerous man alive. The Senate panics and tells him to disband his army and come home. Instead, in 49 BC, Caesar marches his army across a small river in northern Italy called the Rubicon, the legal boundary he was forbidden to cross with troops. The die is cast, he supposedly says. It's a declaration of civil war. He wins it. And the Republic that spent 450 years terrified of one-man rule now has exactly that. Caesar makes himself dictator for life, emphasis on the life part, because it's short. On March 15, 44 BC, a group of senators surround him and stab him 23 times on the Senate floor. They think they're saving the Republic. They've actually killed it, because Caesar's assassination doesn't restore the old system. It just kicks off more civil war, this time between his teenage grandnephew and heir, Octavian, and Caesar's right-hand man, Mark Antony, who's off in Egypt with Cleopatra. Octavian wins. Antony and Cleopatra lose, and famously take their own lives. And Octavian is left standing as the last man in the arena. Now, Octavian is smart in a way Caesar wasn't. He watched his adoptive father get murdered for looking like a king, so he doesn't call himself one. He keeps the Senate, he keeps the elections, he keeps every comfortable label of the Republic, and quietly keeps all the actual power for himself. He takes a modest new title, Augustus, the revered one. It's the greatest political magic trick in history. He becomes Rome's first emperor by insisting, constantly, that he absolutely is not. And it works. Under Augustus, the bleeding stops, the borders stabilize, and Rome enters 2 centuries of relative peace and staggering prosperity. The Pax Romana. Roman peace. This is the postcard version of Rome. Aqueducts, roads you can still walk on 2,000 years later. The Colosseum. A single empire stretching from the reign of Britain to the sands of Egypt, maybe 60 to 70 million people under one system. If you were going to be alive in the ancient world, this, right here, is the moment to do it. Naturally, it doesn't last. Here's the flaw baked into Augustus's magic trick. He built a system that runs perfectly with a good emperor at the top and has absolutely no plan for a bad one. And Rome rolls the dice. Some emperors are genuinely great administrators. Others are Caligula, who reportedly tried to make his horse a senator, and Nero, who's blamed for fiddling while Rome burned in a massive fire in 64 AD. The problem isn't just that some emperors are unhinged. It's that there's no reliable rule for who gets to be emperor next, and whoever controls the army decides. Which means the throne is always, permanently, up for grabs to whichever general has the biggest sword and the least patience. In the 200s AD, this finally detonated. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century, and it nearly ends everything 3 centuries early. In roughly 50 years, Rome burns through around 26 emperors, most of them murdered by their own soldiers or rivals. The economy collapses. The currency is so debased, the coins are basically worthless. Plague sweeps through. Enemies pour across the borders. The empire briefly splinters into 3 pieces. Rome survives. Barely. But it's never really the same. A tough emperor named Diocletian stitches it back together, but to do it he admits something damning. The empire is now too big for one person to rule, so he splits it. An eastern half and a western half, each with its own emperor. On paper, efficiency. In reality, Rome just quietly signed the West's death warrant, because the two halves start drifting apart, and the wealthier, safer East is in no hurry to bleed for the poorer, more exposed West. Then comes the last emperor who really matters, Constantine. He does two things that outlive Rome by 1,000 years. First, he legalizes Christianity, a small, persecuted faith that will grow into the dominant religion of the Western world. Second, he builds a dazzling new capital in the East and names it, humbly, after himself, Constantinople. The center of gravity shifts east, and the West is increasingly on its own. Now the pressure hits. Out on the eastern steppe, a terrifying people called the Huns come storming west, and they shove entire other nations ahead of them like a snowplow. Whole populations of Goths, Vandals, and others show up at Rome's border, not as an invading army, but as refugees, begging to be let in, fleeing something worse. Rome, low on soldiers, cuts a deal. Come in and fight for us. It could have worked. Instead, Roman officials treat the newcomers so brutally, reportedly even starving them into selling their own children, that the Goths revolt. In 378 AD, at Adrianople, they annihilate an entire Eastern Roman army and kill the emperor himself. The barbarians have just learned Rome can be beaten. That knowledge is a poison that never leaves the system. From here, it's a slide. In 410 AD, the unthinkable, a Gothic army under Alaric sacks the city of Rome itself. The city hadn't fallen to a foreign enemy in 800 years. People across the empire are genuinely stunned. It feels like the sky cracking open. And yet, tellingly, the empire doesn't end. It just keeps limping. That's the eerie thing about Rome's fall. Everyone kept assuming it was temporary. It never was. The Western emperors become puppets. The real power belongs to barbarian generals who run the army and simply install whichever figurehead is convenient. Territory falls away. Britain, Gaul, Spain, North Africa, piece by piece, like a table being cleared, until there's almost nothing left to rule but Italy itself. Which brings us back to that teenager, 476 AD. A barbarian general named Odoacer, commanding Rome's own army, decides he's done pretending. He deposes little Romulus Augustulus, and here's the kicker. He doesn't even bother naming a new Western emperor. He just stops. He sends the imperial robes east to Constantinople with a note that basically says, "You don't need a Western emperor anymore. I've got this." And that's it. That's the fall of Rome. Not a bang, a shrug. The most powerful empire the world had ever known ended with a middle manager deciding the top job wasn't worth filling. But here's why. The fall of Rome is almost a lie. Because the eastern half, Constantinople, didn't fall in 476. It kept going, and going. As the Byzantine Empire, calling itself Roman the entire time, it survived for nearly another 1,000 years, until 1453. And even that's not the whole story. Rome's roads, its laws, its Latin, which quietly became French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, its architecture, its calendar, the very idea of a single unifying empire that every later conqueror from Charlemagne to Napoleon would chase like a ghost. Rome never really died. It just dissolved into the bloodstream of the entire Western world. You're arguably still living in its wreckage right now. So maybe the lesson of Rome isn't empire's fall. It's scarier than that. The greatest power in history didn't get killed by a monster at the gates. It got old, comfortable, and divided, and it kept insisting everything was fine. Right up until a barbarian picked up its crown, looked at it, and decided not to wear it. Rome spent 1,000 years afraid of the wrong thing. It feared kings.